pain is, something we all encounter in our lives, and it's a very unpleasant feeling, and we all look to seek relief from it. Substance use and addiction exists in every community, and so does trauma. The main driver of addiction is trauma, but not nearly enough goes into treating trauma. Everyone is focused on treating the addiction. We spend all our energy trying to fix the symptom of trauma, addiction. This leaves the door often open for relapse, as unaddressed trauma can trigger substance use. And if we focus on the root cause of addiction, we can have a better chance at helping people achieve their recovery. Medically speaking, on this first slide, I'm diagnosed substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, addiction issues. To society, I'm looked upon as a junkie, a criminal, and a loser. This is not the face of addiction or trauma, and this is not where it started. This is the face, and this is where trauma and addiction and substance use was starting. My name's Felicella. I grew up in a middle-class home just outside of Vancouver, about 15 minutes away. My parents were very well respected in the community. I have one brother, one sister. I'm the oldest. We grew up in a nice community. Everything looked like it was a perfect family. Behind closed doors, there was verbal and physical abuse. My dad was a gambler, spent late nights out. My mom coped by drinking alcohol, and I suffered from lacking the attention as a child. I felt like I was competing against something I had no knowledge of. And what had started to develop in my life is the verbal and physical abuse started to be directed towards me, both by my mother and my father. And as a young child, and your mind is forming, it became very depressing in my life, where I started to develop anxiety and depression. I'd struggled in school systems. I was looked upon as someone that lacked attention, and the schools that I went to at that time, they could hit you. So not only was I getting abused and hit at home, I was getting hit in schools. And I basically navigated my life like a soldier would a landmine field, through my household and through society. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when the bomb was going to go off. And looking for early ways to cope, for me, was sports. I started to play baseball and soccer, but unfortunately those sports only last, a couple hours a week. And so trying to find other ways to cope at a very early age. My mom I had no stability. We'd come home from school on a Friday, our bags would be packed, we'd be leaving to go somewhere else to stay. We'd stay there for a while, and then we'd come back. And this pattern continued for years. And all the time I was constantly the one that was getting in trouble at school. So I was causing the issues at home. I was told this consistently. So, being a young child, when you start to hear these words over and over and over and over, you start to believe that you are the problem. And the instability in my life, by the time I was 11 years old, I'd started to realize at a very young age that my parents could no longer take care of me. And I was in more harm staying there And so I started running away. And when I started running away, I started getting involved with the street life, which gangs became more of the family. And then I found the greatest thing I'd ever found in the world, because at that time I developed such a self-hatred for myself from tremendous shame and guilt and blame. And when I found street substances, I mean, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me in the world. It gave me the ability to actually function through life. Verbal abuse is often the kind of one that's left off to the side, where people can say things but don't realize the impacts on somebody's life. And it just crippled me as a person. Low self-worth, low self-esteem. And eventually I started to get in trouble with the law. Obviously, the substances that I was using at that age were very expensive, and so I had to break the law in order to achieve them. And by the time I was 14, I was incarcerated, and my mom came to court against me to say that they could no longer take care of me. And they no longer wanted me to live in the household because I had caused all these problems. And I can remember that day as being the moment that somebody said it to somebody else, that I was no longer welcomed. And I didn't understand what the dynamics of that meant, but it meant that the court system would now have authority over me. I was awarded the court now, and that they would be able to move me around until I was an adult. And they did, and they failed. And they failed miserably by causing me more trauma, by not letting me have the stability. I'd been bounced around from group home to group home, from school system to school system, until finally I started running away from these group homes. And anytime I talk, it'd be impacted with more trauma. And, when you're struggling with emotional pain, it's often looked at as, especially if you're a man, like, you're the problem, figure it out, stop doing what you're doing. And what people couldn't understand is that I was struggling with isolation inside that was so deep, and the only thing that filled it up was substances. And by the time 1985 came around, I ran away, hiding into the downtown east side of Vancouver. At 15, 14 is a very young age to be anywhere out on the street. And, I'd started to become entrenched in substance use, and then obviously my addiction just literally took over. Canada, and especially here in British Columbia, has an extreme high rate of overdose deaths, overdoses. They're all up. There's more overdose deaths in British Columbia than homicides, suicides, car crashes, and COVID-19 combined. And yet we have this dueling public health emergency, and one gets addressed while the other one lays to the wayside. In the 1980s, when I was in the downtown east side, there was no harm reduction services. Harm reduction wasn't even a word. You were looked upon as somebody that was broken from society. And what I'd found out years later is that society was broken, and we'd just become this collateral damage. I'd lived in this 2-block radius for 2 decades. I never left. From 1983 to 1993, I was in and out of the downtown east side because I was so young and scared to sleep on the streets in the downtown east side. I'd sleep in another area of town, but I was always in and out. But in 1993 to 2013, I was living in that 2-block radius of the downtown east side, struggling with homelessness, substance use, addiction, and just trying to navigate my life through the pain. And a lot of the times people would say you were in that community because there were services. What people don't remember is that I was in that community before services actually existed. It wasn't until services started to exist in 1993 by a lady that I'd met named Liz Evans that started the Portland Housing Society, who really looked at drug users as being somebody that were human and that they belonged in society and that we should be treated better. And that meant a lot to me at that time, because not only was I struggling, I was literally, my battle was to live. It's hard to do any living when you're just focused on surviving. Addiction has really thrown everything at me in my life. I've struggled with 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back where I had to learn how to walk again. I survived the HIV crisis in the 90s, the dueling crisis in the 90s, which was HIV and the overdose crisis, where 1 in 4 were infected with HIV in the downtown east side. I've survived numerous septic infections. I've been hospitalized. I've been brought back to life 6 times. And so the last overdose was probably one of the most traumatic that I'd experienced. I'd booth 5 at the supervised consumption site in the downtown east side. I woke up, pulled the tube out of my throat, looked over. The nurse was crying. I'd been gone for about 10 minutes. She didn't think I was going to come back. And I asked her, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because I care." And then I started crying. I'd always had this will inside that, that I wanted to do better. I spoke of it a lot. I tried treatment many times. I tried detox many times, and nothing seemed to ever stick. And after that encounter, which was February 18th, 2013, I knew that I was either going to die in my addiction or I was going to die trying to get out. And I knew the risks in myself of getting out, that if I'd relapse, that I could die. I'd never overdosed once in 20 years using heroin, and in 2012, I'd overdosed 6 times in 9 months. So that tells you the tale of just how deadly this crisis has gotten, especially now today we're in BC. Finding heroin in the province of British Columbia is pretty much looking for a needle in a haystack. It's fentanyl, and it's fentanyl everywhere now. It's replaced that supply chain. I've often described as harm reduction being the one thing that gave me the one most important thing that recovery couldn't give me, because I was actively using and wasn't offered it. And harm reduction provided me this vital tool that gave me the encouragement and the passion to keep moving forward. And that was that piece of human connection, which really changed the direction of my life. And not only, like it was said in the beginning, that I wouldn't be alive today without harm reduction, and I wouldn't have the life that I have today without my recovery. And if harm reduction didn't exist, if the supervised consumption site didn't exist and harm reduction services didn't exist, then I wouldn't exist. And neither would these 3 beautiful children exist, or this beautiful family exist. And it's really the power of that connection, of where we're not judgmental towards somebody that's using substances. You have to work with people where they're at to try to improve the quality of their lives. And I know sometimes we get caught up in the medical side of things, when sometimes the harm reduction side of things will fit better, because not prescribing or under prescribing, the risks in today's day and age are astronomical. And one of the most powerful things that I can share with anybody in this world is that power of human connection. And the one thing that I'd like to share in closing with everybody is my grandmother obviously saw me struggle as a child. She'd witnessed the abuse. She tried to do the best she could to protect me from the abuse. And then as I started to run away from home and get involved in gangs and incarceration, it limited my opportunity to, spend time with her. And in the 1990s and up until 2013, when I was in the downtown east side, my grandmother came from Victoria, BC, twice a year to see me in the downtown east side. And it was usually near my birthday or near Christmas. And she would send a message either to the supervised consumption site, because I'd always go there, and she would come into the downtown east side and take me out for lunch and tell me how much I meant to her and how much she loved me. She was never told me once that I needed to stop using drugs. She just said that she had this belief inside that one day that I was going to do big things. And obviously what I just didn't believe what she was saying, but I never forgot what she was saying. And in 2013, when I left the downtown east side, like it was a burning building, I'd left with, one set of clothes on my back, one pair of shoes. I met my wife, and, started to develop a beautiful relationship there. And she became pregnant with our first child. And my grandmother at that first, not even within 2 weeks, we found out that she was pregnant. My grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she had 2 weeks to live, and she was in palliative care, and it was serious. And we thought that we would go and let her know that she would have a great grandchild. Fittingly that December, obviously she's going to die. And we went to the palliative care, and she was there, and she was so happy to see us. And when we told her, something happened. I don't know what it was. It's very hard to describe what happened, but something popped up and inside of her. She just lit up when she heard, and she grabbed my hand, and she was so happy. And she said, "Oh, I can't wait to meet my great grandchild." And I said, "Well, Grandma, you're not going to meet her, because you're going to die in a couple of weeks." And she held on to my hand so tight that it actually started to hurt. And I said, "Hey," and she said, "I will see my great grandchild." And I said, "Okay, let's do this." And daily, my wife and I showed up at palliative care, 7:00 for everybody's grandmother's favorite, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and black Starbucks coffee. Very competitive. And, when we started to get ultrasounds, we'd show her, and about 2 months, 3 months started to pass, and doctors were starting to ask us questions and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And I'm not a doctor. You're the doctor. We didn't tell the doctors what was going on, or, we just kept saying, they were saying that she's not taking all of her medications. I said, "Well, look, just give her the ones that she wants when she wants them. And I guess when she doesn't want them, don't give them to her." And 6 months passed, 8 months passed. And, I'm trying to, coax my wife to try to have the baby, because I'm thinking she might not make it. Some days were really good, and some days were really bad for her. And it was this up and down roller coaster ride, but I just kept showing up and doing my part. And 9 months later, my wife actually didn't give birth in 9 months. She had to be induced 2 weeks later. So it even prolonged even longer. And 9 months and 2 weeks later, I wheeled my grandmother out of palliative care, and she held her great grandson, Noah. And that was the first and only time that she held him. And after I wheeled her back up to palliative care, and it was a block away where she was staying, and came back a few days later and see how she was doing, and I could see the physical impacts of cancer. I could see it with my eyes, the ruthlessness of it. And she held my hand and she said that I had to make sure that you were going to be okay. And I told her, I said, I'm going to be okay. And she said, you go run that race now. And I told her that I'm not coming back anymore. This is goodbye. And she held my hand and we left. And a couple days later, she passed. And going back, I want to tell you about that power of human connection. And not only how my grandmother passed that to me when I was struggling, but how I gave it and paid it forward back to her, because that connection prolonged her life to witness the birth of her great-grandchild. And to me, that is often one of the things that we overlook. We become so wrapped up in the treatment side of it, where we forget to just lay it off to the side and just provide people that connection and treat them like they're human. I hope this talk inspired you. I appreciate everybody. Thank you very much.